fathers. My father was a carpenter. He didn't have his own business, but he worked for a construction company out in Worcester, Massachusetts, and he was really a lead guy. I mean, he did everything from framing to finish. He built 2 houses for our family to grow up in, and I started by his side when I was about 8 years old. First job I ever was on, first job site that I was ever on. I was 8 years old. It was like the week before Christmas, a few days before Christmas, and my father, I remember driving home, he said, "What do you think you're going to get for Christmas?" I said, "A bicycle." But I had spent that day with my father, and some of you guys probably have had similar experiences to this. We were laying hardwood flooring, oak hardwood flooring. That's not easy to do when you're an 8-year-old. But no nailers, cut nails and a hammer, and for a table saw, for a portable table saw, he had a milk crate with a circular saw that had been mounted to the underside of it. Now you got to remember, 9 years old, 8 or 9 years old, that was like 1958. So that kind of dates me, but that's where it started. And my father never gave me the easy jobs, you know. You learned how to dig a hole before you swung a hammer. And you work your way up slowly from that. But I was very lucky. He was very patient. I had a good teacher. By the time I was 15, I was starting to put trim on. The company that he worked for, they had their own excavator, and they would hire a foundation contractor to put the foundation. And these were custom homes in the Worcester area, brand new builds for the most part. Previous to that, he had done some renovation. But the new build started out, and my father and the other guys, and I worked basically summers and school vacations all through college. We'd go up there and we'd frame it, roof it, put the windows in, side it, and then go away and let the subcontractors come in. And if work was slow, we would rock lab it. Now, how many people have heard the word rock lab currently? And I always remember, he always sent me in the bathrooms, the little rooms. We had to cut every piece. And of course, most rock lathers back then, you got paid by the bundle, not by the room or the hour. So I probably wasn't making very much money. I wouldn't have made very much money if I was being paid by the bundle, especially working in bathrooms and closets. But that's how you learn. You know, you start from the beginning and you work your way up. And then from there, I went to college, studied mechanical engineering for a couple of years, realized there would not be a job for me when I got out because there was no shortage of engineers at that time, unlike today. But I loved carpentry and being in the field and thought that someday maybe I could have my own business. So I switched over to the business school, learned a little bit about marketing and accounting and things that might help me in a business world someday. And never got a degree. I was at the University of Massachusetts in Amherst. Came out of school, after 5 years, said, it's time to get a job. I think my father probably felt the same way. So I saw a little ad on a bulletin board at the University of Massachusetts saying, looking for carpenters and laborers, Vermont, New Hampshire. And it was a startup company out of Boston called Great Eastern Building Company. And it was 4 guys who had 3 of them had gone to MIT, 1 had gone to Harvard, and they decided to start a construction company. And they were ahead of their time because what they came up with is this concept. They would draw up a book. They were building condominiums, basically. My first project was in Vermont, Warren, Vermont. And they drew up these books of every wall, all the floor joists, all the rafters, all the plywood. And they had this idea that you could pre-cut everything. And you could assemble the walls in a site-built factory. We'd basically put up a bunch of 4x4s, make perfectly level tables, have guys who were skilled with layout lay out a jig, and have unskilled labor assemble. And we were using pneumatic nailers. That was back in the early 70s. What they didn't realize is that it's a real mistake to cut your rafters before you get up to the top of the second floor, because they're probably not going to fit. They're going to be a little short in most cases. So they learned that lesson, and they realized that some of it had to happen as it was built, but the wall panels, you could pretty much fabricate those ahead of time. So I worked for them for a couple of years, worked my way up from carpenter to foreman to construction site supervisor, and moved around, did a couple projects in Vermont, some in Maine, some in Western Massachusetts. And I met a guy who I became friends with, and we started a construction company of our own. And the first job we did was on Nantucket. We built the Country Store, commercial building down there. And that was an experience. If you're not born on Nantucket, you're not necessarily welcome on Nantucket. And so we had a few foes to come up against. I used as many local contractors as I could. I bought a lot of the materials. Well, actually, I didn't buy the materials locally. That was probably my first mistake. I went down there and priced materials for this project. And we said, boy, that's kind of steep. So I went out to, at the time I was living in Western Massachusetts, so we went out to a company, a lumberyard in Western Mass, Westfield Lumber, and had them price the job for us. And it was cheaper for us to buy everything out there, pay for the ferry to bring it over, hire a lift so that I could get the truck unloaded in the 1 hour between when the ferry came and the ferry left. We just drop everything on the street and send the ferry off. And it worked. We saved a lot of money. We would have never got the bid if we hadn't obtained the materials off island. We used some on-island contractors. For instance, doing the white cedar shingle sidewall, those were the guys you wanted to use. Those guys could shingle day and night better than any of us could shingle at the time. And, but, you know, it was tough. People, they don't like outsiders to come in and build down there. But years later, and a contractor we worked with when we did a This Old House project, he was forward enough, he came up to me one day and he said, you know, when you guys were on the island, we weren't happy that you were here when you started that project. But when we saw how you ran your job and how you put it together, it was something that we appreciated. So in the end, at least my partner and I, we didn't break any rules. We were respected rather than disliked in the end. And I did a couple other projects down there. I did some renovations. I built a new house for an architect who we used on This Old House. And that's how I ultimately got connected to the show. I did a job for the executive producer, the guy who created it, Russell Morash. And then in 1979, we started This Old House. We'll be starting up again in a few more weeks with my 34th year with them. And I overlapped the first 10 years of This Old House with my own business. And then when I started the New Yankee Workshop, you know, 2 TV shows and a contracting company, that wasn't going to work and have a life. How many guys here, I have a question because I was curious when I got to this point, how many guys here are sort of, not only, I mean, I would categorize things, you're either one of the trades, or you're a general contractor, or you're a project manager. Do we have any project managers here, or combinations of those things? So you can coordinate a job, you bring in all your subcontractors. That was a thing when I was contracting that was limited to basically commercial jobs. You never saw that in residential construction. And my company was always renovation. I learned new house building with my father. I got into renovation on my own, and it's a whole different ballgame, as many of you know. I think you can go from new and eventually learn how to remodel, and I think you can go from remodeling into new a little bit easier, but they are different animals. They don't proceed in the same way. You know, that's where I went from the new to the renovation, and when I stopped contracting, I just moved to the point where instead of just being a general contractor, I was managing a much bigger project. The higher end jobs where there's a lot of work, a lot of money, a lot of subcontractors that have to deal with, managing them is a job in its own. And that's sort of where I would have continued had it not been for This Old House. But you know, things go the way they go. And so I had 2 guys who had been with me for a very long time, and they had opportunities to move forward with their careers. So they moved forward. One's a very good contractor in Needham, Massachusetts, and the other one is an architect now. And you know, I got into the New Yankee Workshop, and with the 2 TV shows, that was enough. So, and then New Yankee Workshop was a 4-year plan that went for 21 years. Oh yeah, I know, you guys miss me. I apologize for that greatly. I just hope you understand that, after a while, my family had to make a lot of sacrifice for the amount of time that I put into that and this old house, and I felt that it was just time to, pay more attention to my family, and I had accomplished more than I ever thought I could accomplish on the New Yankee Workshop. And New Yankee Workshop was a process for me. I mean, I wasn't a professional woodworker when we started that show. I mean, I sort of was a finished carpenter, and I learned how to do things along the way. And yeah, I had good equipment. Everyone wants the equipment that I had in the New Yankee Workshop. I remember when we started the show, we put the addition on the back. I had built the original building where the finishing room was. That's how I met Russ Morash. And then in 1988, he said, "How about doing a woodworking show?" And I said, "I don't know." And he said, "Well, we can do a book." So we started with a book. And then we got a funder, which was very unusual. So we then and that became a TV show. And the plan was 4 years, 13 episodes a year. 4 years gives you 52 episodes, which would give you 3 years of TV rights, and it would just run, and it would be fine, because woodworking shows are kind of evergreen, a little different than this old house, which the technology changes a lot quicker. And 4 years went by, 10 years went by, and at the end of the season we'd have a celebration. And Marion Morash, who was the chef on the Victory Garden show, if any of you watched that, well, Russ was her husband. And she said, "Oh, no one's ever going to watch a show like that." And then 15 years went by, and 20 years went by. We kept getting underwriting every year, so we were fully funded for the whole 20-plus years. And we could have kept it going. But, when you start building high boys on two half-hour TV shows, it starts to get a little insane. But I live with the furniture every day. I have it in my house. And it's fun to have it there because I get to see things I would do differently or how they'll hold up. We all learn by our mistakes. And, we tried to, our job was to inspire people to pick up the tools, not necessarily, we didn't expect you necessarily to do the projects. Morash's whole philosophy about renovating houses and doing woodworking and doing gardening was get people interested in it. They'll find their own way. How many people here started similar to the way Tommy and I started, sort of out of a family business or a background like that? You got a few? How many came from completely different careers and decided to get into the construction industry? Yeah, more and more of that. Do you love it? Yeah.
Depends on what day.
Well, especially when you live in New England and your hands are freezing on a snowy day like this. I remember someone once said to me that, you guys are amazing. I can't believe what you do. A lumber truck pulls up and dumps a whole bunch of lumber there, and then first thing you know, you guys are cutting and nailing, and then all of a sudden the house just comes into place. And I said, it's not that hard, and especially if you love it. So I just hope that all of you here love what you do as much as I do. I mean, I love still working. I have an older house that I'm working on. I built a house that I live in. It's still not done, but, my office, as long as it's only my space that's unfinished, that's all that matters. I'll tell you, this will make you feel good. The main staircase in my house. Anybody see the book that I wrote when I built the house? I did a book on the building of the house. I don't think it's in print anymore. I built the house I bought the land in 1991. Built basically a center entrance colonial with an L off the back, which is a timber frame, and then there's another place where my office is, and there's a garage underneath, and so forth. And that was a whole interesting process to try to tie a book into the building of a house, and to try to do it and have a full-time job at the same time. And I did hire in some guys to do some of the framing, but all the complicated stuff, like I have an eyebrow window in my office. I did all the framing on the roof of that. I shingled it. And then the staircase. The staircase is curved at the bottom. It started originally with 4 winders. Now it has 3. And then it went up to the second floor. Well, that was made out of plywood with a plywood rail for like 15 years. I tried to convince my daughter when she was in high school that when she graduated, she could graffiti the handrail, but she said, "No, I want a real staircase." So I finally got that done. But there's still projects to do. And as you know, even if you own a house that's brand new, if you don't maintain it, you're going to pay a lot for it. Of course, that keeps us in business. As Russ Morass used to always say, porches keep carpenters busy. And that was before pressure-treated lumber and all the other things that we have. Well, I want to have a chance for you guys to ask questions because that's why I'm here. I hope you had a great time with your Festool Connect day. These guys are great. I've experienced the Festools a lot myself. You've seen them on the show, and I like the innovation is incredible. So I just hope that sticks up. That stays with everybody. So I think we said we had a couple portable mics that we could float around. If you have a question about the shows or my background, or I don't know, you might trick me up with some construction questions. So we better keep. Anything's open.
So on a typical show, you and Tommy and the gang, if it's filming for 6 months or so, how many days a week are you there, hours a day, actually on site with the crews?
Well, when I was, the first 10 years of the show, I was on the site all day long, every day. It was like a regular job. My guys would be working there, and the homeowners would be given jobs to do on weekends. We have not had as many homeowners in the last several years who have had hands-on, and I miss that as part of the show. I think it's better for our viewing audience to see people actually doing the work, homeowners themselves. But they, it's expensive to do renovations now and construction, so usually both people are working and they're willing to pay for people to do it. I will also say something about that. When we first started doing this old house, I had a lot of guys come up to me when I'd go down to the builder's show or anything like that and say, "What are you doing? You're giving away all the secrets. You're telling everybody how to do the work." And I said, "Not really. There's always going to be do-it-yourselfers. They're going to be amongst us. Isn't it better that homeowners are more informed about what we do and how difficult it can be at times, and be up to date with the technology and understand the terminology of the whole process of construction and renovation? Because it's not going to change. It's not going to make any more people become do-it-yourselfers, but it'll make those who do it themselves a little bit smarter, we hope. And I think that's what's happened, because a few years after that, contractors would come up and say, "Gee, we saw you had this product on the show," or "Richard showed this new technology that we haven't seen yet." Like we just did one on the project in Essex where this new septic system, this sewer system that's built into the house. I was with Richard the other day. I said, "Richard, what's the maintenance on that? We didn't cover that. How come we didn't cover that?" I mean, we know how hard it is to do septic systems now because the land is getting less available. It's capable of putting in a septic system easily or designing one. So now all those new technologies are coming out, and we like to try to make sure that we stay on the cutting edge of that. And then in terms of days, it varies. Now Tommy's on the job pretty much every day, but he's got his other jobs going. He's got some big projects going, so he's got other jobs going, but he's got some good lead guys now. On the Cambridge project that we did, he has a young guy, Danny, and Danny runs that job when Tom's not there. But he's a kid who worked his way up, and Tommy trained him, and he's very, very knowledgeable and very good. Filming, we probably, for the 26 episodes of the show that we do, we probably film 2 days at the most for each episode, and that may be spread out. But when we're filming, sometimes I'm there all day, sometimes I'm not. My schedule is somewhat limited by a contract, so to speak. But I'll tell you, the most interesting day so far in this past season was the day we demoed the Essex house. We demoed that roof. That day it was over 100 degrees. We thought we were all going to die. The producer said, "Oh, we'll never do that to you again." And by the time I was cutting that one rafter with the template, that was like at 7 o'clock at night. And I was barely able to stand up. I mean, I'm not young like I used to be. You can ask my wife. She's here. When I came home, I was literally sick. I mean, it was so hot that day. And we were up on that roof, and we started cutting it out a little piece at a time. And Tommy said, "Oh, enough of this. Get the lull, put the forks on it. We're going to start taking big chunks of this thing off the roof." And that's what we did. But we were there. You saw us. When you see us working, it's real. We don't have B-team come in and take care of it. I mean, Tommy has his guys there working, doing the normal job, and they help us set up scenes sometimes. But we do the work for real.
Norm, I'd like to say I'm a retired shop teacher. I brought that up earlier. And I'd say most of the people here remember their shop teachers. But you have influenced so many of my students. I used your project books for years, and I'd just like to thank you on behalf of all the students I've had that have gone into the trade. So, yeah, I think you did a great job.
Well, thank you. We definitely need more young people in the trades. And I had a long conversation with a writer a few months ago. It's like, how do we do that? You know, how do we get them away from the electronics, and how do we get them to get their hands into the work? Because the best way to learn, you know, my stepson went to school at Assabet Valley for an electrician. And the best time to learn is in the field. And when I was a teenager and I started working with my father, we used to get the top graduate out of Worcester Trade School, because my father worked in the Worcester area. And the trouble with the kids then is similar to what we have today. He's like, well, I went to school. I know how to do this. No, you don't. You haven't been in the field yet. Come and shingle with me when it's 30 degrees outside and you're up on a roof 2 stories up and the wind is blowing, you know. And you got to learn by your mistakes. And I always felt when I had my guys, young guys who came to work for me, you know, I always would say to them, if you don't understand what I'm telling you, ask a question, because I'm more than happy to explain it to you again. And I'll draw a diagram for you if I have to, but you know, I want you to learn it right. And you are allowed a certain number of mistakes, but you never make the same mistake twice. That's kind of, it sounds hard, but I think it's what you have to do to, you know, get people going. But what I think we have to do somehow is, I know some of you here said that you came from different careers and you got into construction. I've run into other people like that, and part of the reason they did it was because the job they had, they weren't really happy in it. They weren't really getting any satisfaction out of it, and they got into construction in some form, whether it be managing projects or actually physically doing the work, and you found out how satisfying it was, and you get hooked, because once you're hooked into it, it's really hard to walk away from it. It's very satisfying because it's three-dimensional. You know, the smell of the wood and being in the shop, all of that stuff is really kind of addicting in a way. And I think kids would get that. And they also don't understand that, you know, when times are good for the construction industry, you can make a good living being in the construction business. And, you know, things haven't been great, but they will come back. Another question?
Oh,
There's one back there.
Hi. I was just wondering, how do you pick your projects for all the ones
this
you
old
have
house?
to pick through?
Yeah, picking the projects for this old house. That's a question we get a lot, and over the years it's varied slightly. Right now we have a website. Part of our This Old House website is pickmyhouse.com. I believe that's how it's written up. And people submit their projects. And we make it very specific about what we're looking for. And generally, we're not looking for the same type of project we just did. The show did go national 4 or 5 years into it. So we haven't been out of New England in the last couple of years, which is interesting. We were in Cambridge and Essex this past year, and the year before that, we were in Bedford, Mass., and we were here in Barrington, Rhode Island. So that was a choice because we just thought the projects were worth it, and our budgets were tight, so travel was an issue sometimes. But people submit the plans, the producers look at it, they show it to Tommy, they show it to all of us on the team, and we kind of go, well, that looks okay. For instance, I'll give you a good example. The California project, the LA one we did a couple years ago, producers went out and scouted like 10 projects that they had heard about either from realtors or real estate agents or people who just wrote in. Producer comes back, lays them all out, gives us a quick rundown of what each project involves. And in that particular project, and Tommy doesn't have as much say in that one because he's our local guy, Kevin and I looked at it and we immediately pointed to the Spanish Colonial Revival that was built in the 20s and said, that's the one I want to see us do. Now, we never went out there to actually see it before they agreed to do the project. But the very first day that Kevin and I were out there and we walked through the house, we said, this is a home run. This is a perfect project for us. And it was, because we got heavy into the earthquake retrofit. The house was built in the 20s. It was 2 miles from a serious fault. It was in perfect condition. I mean, if you watch that show, you say, how did that house how could it still be there? It didn't have a crack in the plaster. And it was a perfect house, but it just was outdated, and it was small. So it's kind of hit or miss. It's like winning the lottery. A lot of people think that we pay for everything. We don't pay for anything. The contractors have to be paid just like anybody else. Tommy might give a slight discount. In the past, a lot of product manufacturers will donate product to the project, windows, sometimes big ticket items, windows, appliances, kitchen cabinets, countertops, flooring, a lot of material, boilers, all that stuff might get donated. But that's considered a gift, so the owner has to pay income tax on that as gift tax. And we tell them that up front. They have to pay fair market value tax on those gifts. People say, what's the benefit to being on this old house? The only thing I can think of is there's 2 benefits to it. Because of the TV schedule, the project will be done faster than the real world. Secondly, because you got Tom Silva, and for the most part, most of our remote contractors that we've worked with have been very highly qualified. You've got Tom Silva in there, so no matter what the schedule is, no matter how difficult it is, he's not going to sacrifice one single bit of quality in the project. So, whether the schedule is a month shorter than it should be in the real world, his guys are just going to work longer, that's all. But he's not going to let one single detail go by. That's because of who he is. So it varies. I mean, we're looking at projects now. I can't tell you what they're going to be because it hasn't been released in the press, but I think both projects will be interesting coming up starting in September. You'll see something in the papers, in our magazine, probably in the next 2-3 months.
Any other questions? Hands? Oh, got a couple back here. You guys like to see me run all over this place, I swear. I sure need that, too.
Yeah, I'd like to know what the most expensive project you guys did. I think it's the one with the piano room.
Oh, the one in Manchester by the Sea. It's hard to say because, we spanned 34 years, 1979 to, 2013 coming up. And so, the value of cost of construction, I would say probably the most expensive project we ever did was the second one we ever did in 1980, which was in Newton, Massachusetts. It was an H.H. Richardson shingle-style house that had been abandoned for several years that we converted into 5 condominiums. And because it was a historic building, the exterior had to be kept pretty much original. And we gutted that whole thing. We replaced sections of the rubble stone foundation. We basically took it back to the frame and the sheathing, and that was it. And we rebuilt that whole place into 5 condominiums. We spent over $1 million in 1980. That project today would be probably, I would guess, closer to $5 million or more. So that, to me, was probably the most expensive one. And that one almost put us under because we sold 4 out of the 5 units. The main house, a 3-story structure, remained on the market till, I think, we had responsibilities to the loan, the construction loan. WGBH did, the TV station. And had we not sold that unit, I'm not sure this old house would still be around. But that would probably be the most expensive one. And the second most expensive one probably would be the Manchester by the Sea house that we did that big fancy room with the piano in it and all the mahogany paneling in that room. And I did that crazy surround around the fireplace with all the big moldings and curved seats and all that stuff. Yeah, that would be right up there. You got the microphone somewhere.
Yeah, on New Yankee Workshop, I noticed that you're always making a jig before you start any of your projects. And it seems to me you spend more time making the jig than you do on actually the project.
Right.
Do you keep those jigs, and how much time do you really put into making them? I know I've done a few, and it can be frustrating.
Well, I will tell you that jigs are part of woodworking. You may think it takes a lot of time to make that jig, but generally speaking, they save time in the long run, and they give you a consistency level that is very, you can repeat things very accurately over and over again. And I keep all the jigs. Sometimes what I'll actually do is take a jig that I built for one project and modify it slightly for another project. So they're not, they don't have to stay original as they were. I can alter them a little bit to accomplish a different job. I think any woodworker who doesn't use jigs is not really understanding the whole process, because I think jigs are a big part of woodworking, and it's a big part of carpentry, too. I mean, think of some of the simple jigs that you come up with in a way for carpentry. Even the one, it's not really a jig, but a process that you use, like in the Essex house when I showed that we had Richard said to me the other day, he said, well, why didn't you show how to lay out the rafter? And I said, oh, come on. I don't think that our audience is quite at that point laying out a very steep pitch rafter. I could explain that, but it would take, they don't want to give me that much TV time. And there's so many different variables because there's different kind of roof systems you're dealing with. But the fact that every rafter in a common rafter configuration, the critical thing is to have every one exactly the same, to show that you make one and you put a couple pieces of strapping on the top of it and you've got a template and you can bang them out one after another and lay them out. I think that's a simple carpentry version of a jig. But in woodworking, there's a lot of them. I mean, I have jigs that I've built for the lathe to make sliding dovetails in turnings that I do for tables. I've used that thing over and over and over again. Because once you make it, that becomes pretty evergreen. It applies to a lot of different projects. So jigs, I think, it's hard for me to answer the question, how long does it take me to make the jig versus how much time does it save me in the actual process. I'm not looking so much about saving time as I am for consistency, to do the same thing over and over again and get the same result.
Another one back here.
Hey, Norm. A number of years ago, you actually did a project in London, England. I'm curious, what are the biggest learning experience you had doing an international job like that?
Yeah, London was fun. We've gone as far east as London, and we've gone as far west as Honolulu. And London was unique. They don't do carpentry the same way we do. And one thing that was very unique about that project, I remember, they kind of did it backwards. They had already renovated the first 2 floors of that flat, and then now they were doing the 3rd floor. It seems like they would have started at the top and come down. And the other thing was we brought in a bunch of pneumatic nailers to show the British carpenters. We thought we'd wow them with the pneumatic nailers. They were wowed for about 5 minutes. The next week we came back, they were all in a pile in the corner of the room. These guys didn't even wear a tool belt or a tool apron. They had the nails in their pocket, and they would nail blocking. They cut blocking. Talk about jigs. They cut blocking 1 block at a time. Measure it, mark it, cut it. Measure it, mark it, cut it. Not cut a block and use that one to cut 30 more. It used to make me crazy to watch these guys. It was like, come on, let's go. And then they had a great thing. They had a great line about how much caulking they used. They said, we use it by the buckets. And I'm like, oh boy, what do we get ourselves into now? And then the other thing, don't trust the general contractor when he says, oh, that variance you need to tip the roof up, to change the pitch of the roof, oh, we've done that before. That'll pass no problem. The last day we're on the shoot, the welders are there cutting away the steel because they turned it down. So it was unique. I mean, you learn. I mean, it's just like, now a good learning experience for me was being in New Mexico and see them build with Adobe and how they build down there. And they do a lot different than they did, obviously, with the original Adobe-style structures, but because now they put a lot of concrete and they build in, load beams and so forth. But, I like doing the remote projects because you see the different types of architecture and how they treat things differently. But that one was unique. And they would go out at 10 o'clock in the morning for bangers and hash. I don't know how these guys could work after eating that food. It was unbelievable. And they didn't come to work with pickup trucks. They came to work on the train with their bag or their motorcycle. It's a different world. There's no Home Depots over there. Or maybe there is now, but.
Now you know why all our tools are in sustainers, right? You got to take the train to get to work.
Hey, I will tell you about Festool. I want to tell you something about Festool. My wife and I were in Amsterdam a few years ago. My daughter was going to school in England, so we met her in Amsterdam. And my daughter and my wife went into some used clothing store, I think it was, or something. And so I said, I'm not going in there. And I'm standing out on the street, and I'm watching. It's like a play. All these people on bicycles. And I don't know how they don't get killed over there. There's cars and bicycles, and they're all turning. and no one's getting hit, no one's blowing the horns or anything. And there's these guys coming down on their bicycles with Festool sustainers in their baskets on the front of their bicycle handlebars. So they love them. They go around all the time over there.
Got one back here.
Where is it? Where are we now?
So you've been talking about some of the cool projects. Do you have any standout favorites that really you just, are always in your memory? I know there's been some pretty typical jobs that probably kind of fade into the background because they're all the same, but you seem to have been around the world and, as you said,
You're talking about this
alluded to
Yeah,
London,
you're talking about-
but any disasters on the job that are kind of funny or anything that stands out?
Well,
you wanna-
sometimes the TV crew tries to pull a joke on us once in a while. When we were in Concord, Massachusetts, Steve Thomas's first year, and we did the barn there, and we thought we could save the frame. And Ted Benson came in and said, this thing is no good. We're going to have to take it down. Maybe we can save a few pieces of lumber and make something for the house later. And so they hooked a chain or a rope onto the thing, and they start shooting this, and they pull the whole frame down. Frame comes crashing into the ground. And at that time, the TV equipment we used was a little more cumbersome. Now it's a camera and a cameraman, no audio guy. You just walk around. It's different. Then you had a control room with long cable and monitors and tape decks and all that stuff. And Morash, the engineer who's on, recording it, after it comes down, he says, "Did you want us to roll on that?" I thought Morash was going to take his head off. I mean, it was like... But favorite projects, it's hard. It's like your own children. But for me, the Bigelow house, this old house I mentioned earlier, that was one of my favorites. That was a major accomplishment. That thing had, I think we put 100 squares of wood shingles on the roof of that house. We did about, I don't know how many we did on the sidewall. Santa Fe was one of my favorites because it was so different. It was such a different type of construction, and seeing how those guys worked down there was completely different. Trying to think where else was one that was actually, more or less unusual in that sense. The first one was, this old house that got us started was a favorite. The one in Dorchester, that was just we bought that house. I don't know if many of you know the history of that house, but Channel 2 bought that house for $17,000 in 1979. And we renovated it in about 16 weeks. And it was all a culled together group of guys who didn't really even know each other. In fact, Morash I was building the barn for the New Yankee Workshop when he said to me, "You want to be part of this TV show?" I said, "No. What do you mean?" So he said, "Oh, come on over with me." So we go over to Dorchester, and we look at this building, and Bob Vila, who was hired as the host, he was more of a developer, but he had some guys working for him, and they had started some work in the eaves, and I wasn't all that impressed with it, and I kind of said, "If this is what you're looking for, I don't think I'm your guy." And he said, "Oh, okay, well, no, that's okay, we'll fix that." And I said, "All right, what do you want me to do?" He was basically he even worked on it himself. It was, again, just getting a bunch of people together who had some experience. I had been working at it for a long time already. And, we just kind of plugged our way through it, and then they sold it on the Channel 2 auction for $45,000. We just about broke even. It was in a tough neighborhood. There were robberies on that. So we got robbed like the second week we were on the job. But the house just recently got sold, so the same owner was in it for over 30 years. And we went back to it a couple times, and it always looked great. But I think this old house, I keep running this by the producers, we've been doing this show long enough, we should go back to one of the houses we've already renovated and do it again. It's every 30 years is about right, it's time to do it again. That house in Dorchester has 1-inch square parquet floors that we just glued down, and it has orange Formica countertops. So either we're going to wait so long that orange Formica countertops are going to come back into style, or we should just do another renovation there. And I think the Carlisle project was a favorite too. That was a pretty good transition. I think I just lost my mic. That was a good transition, keeping the barn and keeping the house and then filling in the L. Okay, thanks. So are we pretty much caught up on questions? If anybody has one, you can shout it out if we don't have another mic. Right there in the middle. Did I ever mess up a project? Of course. What's that? Oh, no, we fix it. You can always fix videotape. I remember I was cutting when I did the butler's table, one of those little tables that becomes a tray, and I had made a little jig to make the cutouts, the handholds in the two short leaves of the table. And I guess I didn't clamp it down tightly enough, and I was using a router with a templating bit on it to cut it out, and I knew it kind of was going off kilter, but you never stop. They always tell you on TV, you never stop unless your life's in danger. And I got done with it, and I was like, ah. And the cameraman at that time was so quick. He like zoomed right in on it. It was like a big S. It was terrible. And so it hung in the shop for 20 years as a memento. And once in a while, you cut something wrong, and I have a bad habit. I'm a Yankee through and through. And when I prep up for a new Yankee workshop project, I don't cut a lot of extra pieces. And every once in a while, I'll mess a piece up, and I got to start from scratch. I got to get a piece of rough lumber and to plane it and join it and cut it and rip it and make one piece because I'm too cheap to, have a couple extra pieces on hand in case I need them. So we were going to try to make a bloopers tape, but we didn't have quite enough to fill a half hour because, I think the most visible mistake I ever made on New Yankee was when I was building the wine rack, and I had kerfed some redwood to go around the corner on the base, and it snapped when I was bending it around the corner. But there's a few here and there. A few injuries. You see me don't have a Band-Aid on. Next shot, I have a Band-Aid on because I gashed my hand. Any other questions?
I really enjoyed that episode you did where you built the small sailing dinghy
Oh, yeah.
workshop. I always wondered if you had an interest in doing anything else with wooden boats. Maybe this old boat.
Well, I tell you, it's funny that you ask that. When we built that boat, we built two of them, New Yankee 1, New Yankee 2. New Yankee 1 is sitting in New Hampshire someplace at a friend of mine's house. It's really a kid's sailboat. But being that we're here in Rhode Island, and we actually have a place down here, I do have one boat project I want to do in my bucket list, so to speak. I want to build a Herreshoff 12 and a half.
Really?
Yeah. I'd love to build one of those. Yeah. I mean, we wouldn't do it for a TV show, but it'll probably take me years to get around to doing it. But I'd love to do it. I actually have a 1953 Penn Yan Swift runabout that I grew up with as a kid. It's a wooden boat. It was made out in Penn Yan, New York, that I still own. That was a family boat. It hasn't been in the water in 20 years, but it's in pristine condition, so I've kept that. One thing I say, how many people here are native Rhode Islanders? Yeah, we got some out-of-towners. I was actually born in Rhode Island. I don't know how many people know that. Born in Woonsocket. And my grandmother ran a luncheonette in Albion all her life. Blanche's Luncheonette, if you've ever been in Albion, Rhode Island. I thought I saw one more. I guess we have any more? We're all set?